You are listening to Whole Earth Radio. The health revolution starts now. You are listening to Whole Earth Radio. The health revolution starts now.
Why are Americans so sick? Why are Americans so heavily medicated? And how are these two questions correlated? This is the topic that I'm going to be delving into today on Whole Earth Radio with my special guest, Steve Lankford of Health Quest Podcast. Steve, thank you for taking this on with me today.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is a topic that I'm passionate about, and you'll hear it in my voice today because it's so important. And I'm glad that you're giving me a chance to talk about it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I know this is something that you and I have both been talking about, and I'm actually going to be a guest on your show on Health Quest Podcast coming up. I was just remarking recently, that I know Michael Corleone was the godfather. Someone reminded me that Dale Alexander, if people are familiar with that name, was the codfather back in the day. But when Tom and Nan had you on their podcast, they referred to you as the podfather. Did I get that right? The godfather, the codfather, you're the podfather. So,
well, I think you did get that right. And they were very generous in their accolades on that. And I had not heard that term before, but come to find out, there is actually, my wife was just looking into the history of podcasts, and lo and behold, there's somebody way back that was in the very beginning generations of podcasting who was referred to as the podfather. So I'm the second one, maybe. I may be one of the early ones for the natural products industry. And, when I started my podcast, it's been over 11 years now, I would go to the trade shows and tell people I do a podcast. And the universal answer was, well, what's a podcast? Then about 5 years ago, people would go, oh, yeah, I know what podcasts are. I listen to podcasts. And then the last couple of years I go and everybody goes, oh, yeah, we're starting a podcast, too. So it's really, become the people's forum. It's a wonderful opportunity for people like us to share our expertise, and Nan and Tom and, Michael from Michael's Natural Health Products and Karina. These are people that you and I both have been in this industry with who are passionate about sharing the knowledge, because we understand how critical it is to pass on information that people can find actionable, accurate, credible, reliable. The natural products industry is the place where that happens. And the independent health food stores historically has been where that happens. And now it happens on shows and podcasts like this. So again, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is such an important topic. And I believe you had said when we talked about it that you first got the idea of addressing this question, just to jump right in on the topic, because I think it relates to everyone. When you get into the minutia of the health food business, I find it very interesting. I find the history of American business in general very interesting. So when I go to, museums about American history and you look at our industry, we have a lot of legacy brands and stores that have been around for a long time. I don't want to imply that health food is becoming, a thing of the past, but I think, our present needs to be kind of, if you don't know your past, you don't know your future, right? And I think if we look at the history of medicine, the history of food, and then our industry's place in it, a question like, why are Americans so sick? Why are Americans so heavily medicated? It becomes very pertinent, and you start to see patterns, perhaps.
Well, I dealt with customers for over 45 years. I owned a small independent health food store. And as the owner, the guy behind the counter for many of those years, I was the one answering questions that consumers had for me. if I don't get my cholesterol down, my doctor's going to put me on statins. If I don't get my blood sugar down, my doctor's going to put me on metformin. If I don't get my blood pressure down, my doctor's going to put me on ACE inhibitors or whatever it is. People are deathly afraid of not taking medications, and yet they don't want to. But they also don't feel like they're confident enough to say, I don't want to take that medication. They may read the list of side effects and go, oh, well, that bothers me a little bit, but this drug is 70% effective at reducing my risk. And so, if I don't take it, that means I'm really at risk for something bad happening to me, a bad outcome. And I don't want that, but I don't know enough to not do it. And so people are very confused. And I used to be very confused. Why is this? Why does it seem, and why is it reported that Americans take more prescription drugs, spend more on prescription drugs than any other country in the world? Are we really that sick that we need all of these drugs? And that was my confused question. I had no answer to that until I learned about this thing called the NNT. It's actually just NNT. It stands for numbers needed to treat. And when I learned that, it changed my worldview. It explained why we were in this situation and completely changed how I look at prescription drugs. And I think by the time we get done exploring this, you'll be looking at drugs a different way as well. And I think our listeners, if they pay attention, they'll look at it a different way also, in a critical way. This is something that what I have found is that when I ask people like you, do you know about the NNT? The answer is always no. What is it? I have never found anybody but the person I learned it from who knew about it. And so it's become one of those topics that I'm very passionate about, because there are very few things that I run across in my experience that change my worldview on certain topics. And this is one of those. So that's maybe a bold statement, but I hope to make it realistic for you.
Right. And we've got the web address up there on the screen. It's thennt.com, where folks can go to the website that gives some more information. I want to go back to the initial question, you asked, why are Americans so sick? Why are Americans so heavily medicated? And you gave credit for that question initially from, I believe you said Michael Murray was
Yes.
the person that, and he's somebody that really impressed me, because when I came into the industry, and maybe you can speak to this, it was a little more folk medicine, a little
Yes.
more traditional use. This is herbalism as taught from, certainly documented, a sort of research, but it was more folk use that
Yes.
was being, addressed. And I believe it was, Dr. Murray and Dr. Pizzorno that really, to me, blew the doors off the American health food industry with research-based supplementation and saying, look, we've got, the research existed. I just don't think it was always being correlated. And somebody, once I saw a lecture with Michael Murray, and somebody asked him how he did all this stuff, and he said he had a photographic memory. He said he was blessed with a photographic memory, which certainly explained how he could take all these studies and synthesize all that information into what they did with the textbook in natural medicine and that kind of thing. Folks like yourself have been taking that approach for many years and using a science-based approach to natural treatment of health, I guess.
Well, Michael Murray is certainly one of my champion pioneers in this industry. The Encyclopedia of Natural Medicine was that seminal book that he wrote. The book that it did an interview with him, and people can hear this interview on Health Quest podcast. If they just go on there, search for Michael Murray, it'll be in the list of interviews I did with him. But he wrote a book called What the Drug Companies Won't Tell You and Your Doctor Doesn't Know.
Wow.
And
I think I've got that one on the shelf.
yes, and get in there and read about the NNT, because it's there that he brought that to me and blew my mind. And since then, it's been something that certainly is highly personal for me, you know, when we talk about drugs. But if we as educators actually understand this, we can teach people how to be less fearful of these drugs and not using these drugs, and why they can feel confident making different decisions than they are today. This is going to be a really interesting concept that I think sometimes people hear it and they go, oh, that can't be true. You know, it just sounds so astounding. So we can look at a number of different popular drugs. I often use statin drugs because so many people are familiar with statin drugs and they're taking statin drugs. They're not sick. They've never had a heart attack, but yet they're taking statin drugs. So, you know, it's a really good example of people being medicated, and actually how effective are these drugs? You know, if you listen to the advertisements on TV, Lipitor advertises itself as reducing the risk of heart attacks by 33%. Does that claim sound familiar?
Yes.
Yes, it's the one we all hear, 33%. Well, and my cholesterol's a little high. Maybe that's good medicine. Maybe I take that, I reduce my risk of a heart attack by 33%. Who wouldn't want to do that? Well, a lot of us don't want to do it, but it sounds so good. There are other drugs, like, let's say, the Pfizer COVID vaccine. Do you remember when it said 90% effective at preventing hospitalizations and death? Do you remember that claim?
Yeah,
all right.
I've heard that.
So, okay, I just happened to go look at the NNT research on the COVID vaccine. They just published it in May. And lo and behold, it fits this same pattern. So let's start with the statin drugs. We'll just put the COVID stuff on the side, and we can touch base on it later. But I don't care which drug classifications that you want to apply this to. You can look at the bisphosphonates, the bone building drugs. You can look at the blood pressure drugs. You can look at the diabetes drugs, the cholesterol drugs. All of these, what I call lifestyle drugs, can all be found, the research on the NNT, at the NNT.com. It's not the only place, but that's the one place that brings it all together. So now let's just look at statin drugs. Are they really 33% effective at reducing the risk of heart attacks and strokes? So if we ask ourselves, why should I take this drug? That's the reason: reduce heart attack, stroke, and death. Those are the three, what they call endpoints. This is how we measure the effectiveness of a drug. Does it reduce the incidence of those particular episodes? And the advertising would lead you to think, well, it reduces the risk by 33%. So yeah, it's got to bring them down. So how do we get to that 33%? Here's where this is legitimate math, but it's the math that is only telling you part of the story. This is the dirty little secret about prescription drugs right here, what I'm going to explain to you. If you take 100 people, that's your control group, and you take 100 people who is the treated group, okay, simple math, 100 people in each group. If you look at that 100 people that are not treated, for a period of, I think it's 4 years, the studies look at. So 100 people over 4 years, 3 people will have a heart attack or a stroke
in the control,
or an event in the control. 3 people.
Just in a random sampling of 100 people, we would expect 3 heart attacks.
Correct. And so these actually are the control groups of the study. The NNT comes from having a control group and an actual group. So it's not just some random group. It is the people who were chosen for the study.
Got it.
Many times it's people who either have the disease, the high cholesterol or the high blood pressure or whatever, and they're the untreated group. So what happens to the untreated group? 3 out of 100 over 4 years. you take the treated group and you give 100 people a drug for 4 years, the number of heart attacks goes from 3 to 2. So the difference between 3 and 2 is a 33% reduction.
I see.
But it's only 1 out of 100 that's actually the difference. So these numbers, they have what's called the relative risk reduction, the RRR. The 33% is the relative risk reduction. Out of the people who respond, what's the difference? But now out of the whole group, it's called the absolute risk reduction, the ARR. And the ARR says you have to treat 100 people with statin drugs for 4 years to stop one cardiac measuring endpoint. So how are we overtreated? We're treating 99 people that are not going to benefit from the drug. The statistics of the study say the reduction is 1%. The relative reduction is 33%, but that's only amongst the victims, the people who actually have an event. So they're discounting all of the other people, or they're treating all of these other people to stop one event. So the NNT, numbers needed to treat, says how many people do you have to treat to have one positive outcome? So it's always looking how many to treat for one positive outcome. So the NNT also is equal to what they call the ARR, absolute risk reduction. So if you know the NNT of a drug, you then get to make an intelligent decision. If somebody says you have a 1/3 chance of avoiding a heart attack, even though you've never had one, if you take this drug for 4 years. Or if they say you have a 1 in 10 chance, or a 1 in 100 chance of avoiding an event. So are you the one? Because I live a crappy lifestyle and I eat like a mess and all my family has had early heart attacks. Am I the one, or am I the 99 that's not going to have an event? And even better, if I'm somebody who takes care of myself, how much better are my odds not to have it? It's already 99%. How much better do you want it to be? Well, take care of yourself and you'll be even better. So to me, that was just an astounding revelation of why are so many people taking drugs, because you have to treat all these people who don't know that they're being treated to no beneficial effect. I'll let you jump in there, Rob.
Well, I just wanted to ask you, I just want to understand something, because I appreciate you bringing this to the table, because anytime we can look at things, through an analytical lens, I think to the average person, these numbers, I think to any lay person, I think to all of us, the more numbers you have, the more data that you're looking at, and you don't deal with this for a living, it can be confusing. And that's daunting. Sort of what they're counting on if they're using this for marketing. 33% reduction sounds great. I just want to clarify something you said. You said every clinical trial has an NNT and an RRR and an ARR. Is that meaning that those can be calculated, or is that something that is already calculated as part of published research?
Well, having not seen all the studies, of course, it is a number that comes out of the studies, because this is how they determine, how effective are these drugs. And actually, a drug only has to be about 5% effective to be considered a blockbuster drug. So 1 out of 20 is kind of, that's anywhere under 20 is considered a blockbuster drug. The best drugs we have are under 10. There's a few drugs under 10 that perform well enough that, 5 or 6 people maybe get results out of 10, but those are rare, so it is a part of the clinical studies. Whether it's all part of the published work, may depend on other parameters, but it's a number that comes out because N is oftentimes referred to as the number of participants. So the N is a number that they know. They know how many are in the placebo group, and they know how many are in the treated group. And so that becomes the numbers that then they're comparing one to another. How much better is our drug with the same population as without? And so then what they're looking for are these very small differences that seem large, but they're only large for the very small segment of the population for which they actually provide a benefit. And so it is in the studies. And so I would say if you pick a popular drug, a well-known drug, I recently looked up Shingrix, the shingles drug. And, that has an NNT, I think, of something, I don't remember for sure, but it's like 88. So you have to treat 88 people to stop one episode of shingles. And the pain that you have afterwards that they prescribe it for, it's well over 200 people that you have to treat to help one. So, you look up any drug, and I see them on TV, and my wife will watch me, and they'll have this drug I've never heard of. And I go, well, what's the NNT on that drug? And because if it's there, it may not be always easy to find. If it's common and popular, you're going to find it on the NNT.com, because that's what they do, is they just publish this information with a reasonable analysis. The other thing that they report on is what's called the NNH, numbers needed to harm. So let's say with statins, you have an NNT of 100, you have to treat 100 people, but the NNH for statins is 6. 1 in 6 is going to have a side effect. So this 100 people that aren't going to benefit, a sixth of them, 17, 18 people are going to have a side effect because of that medication. And that's typically, muscular related rhabdomyolysis, I think it's called,
Wow.
The muscle pain that people get. So it's not only good to look at the numbers needed to treat, but what are the numbers needed to harm? Because oftentimes they may be low, but in some cases they may be high. That means a lot of people are having some kind of a side effect. So I think if people looked at that and maybe had a different kind of evaluation, I have a 1 in 100 chance of this drug doing me some good. Maybe I'll start exercising. But what's so bad is it's not just the statin drugs. It's the COVID vaccine. It's the blood pressure medications. The blood pressure medications are even less effective at preventing the endpoint. So this is when we look at, why do you take a blood pressure drug? Because I don't want to have a stroke. I don't want to have a heart attack. I don't want to die. And, high blood pressure is a known killer. So when your blood pressure gets to 130, and they want to start putting you on drugs, well, come to find out, the studies on blood pressure medications don't begin until your blood pressure is 170. So if you're down in the 140, you're not even in the group that they're measuring for benefit. And so when you start looking at the NNT for these blood pressure medications, how many people do you have to treat to stop a heart attack, a stroke, or death? It's the same story. You have to treat dozens or hundreds of people, sometimes even 1,000 people you have to treat before you get a statistically significant benefit. And it's just incredible, because how many people are going to feel bold enough to push back on blood pressure medications? Same thing with diabetes medications. It doesn't do anything to extend the benefits. The benefit endpoints are 0 with diabetes medications, but there are harms to it, but not to listen to the pharmaceutical companies or the doctors. You will never hear that story, because the pharmaceutical companies have no interest in promoting their drugs that way. That's clear from the advertising. And I truly think that doctors don't think of it either. They may have learned it in medical school, but that's not what they're learning from the drug reps. And therefore, they bought into this whole system without critically thinking. And word has it that if you taught doctors this, they would prescribe less medications or less often. And if you taught consumers this, they would accept these medications less often. So the answer is, why are we over medicated? Because that's the model of the pharmaceutical industry. Are we really that sick? Not that we need the medication. We're sick from the drugs that we take, but all of these drugs, maybe 80, 90%, are going to people who do not benefit. So therefore, we are over drugging ourselves to no benefit. And it doesn't have anything to do with lifestyle or diet or any of that. These statistics come about from the studies. So if you're a conscientious person, you're likely to do better than the average anyway, because you're making better choices. So this concept is so hard for people to wrap their head around. I can't wrap my head around it sometimes as well, and I don't know about how you feel about, talking about COVID, but I'll mention the NNT of the COVID vaccine if you want, but I won't if you don't.
Before we go there, because we were just talking about blood pressure,
Sure.
and we will definitely get into COVID. I wanted to, or the COVID, vaccines and whatnot. Certainly not afraid to talk about that in a fact-based way, but I wanted to relate something you said, because, if there's, if pharmaceutical treatment is like a risk reward model here, we're looking at the NNT, we're looking at the NNH, and trying to, and taking some factors into consideration to figure out what the risk reward balance is there.
Yes.
I wanted to turn that a little bit to the side and say, okay, let's look at what yourself, perhaps myself, or certainly Dr. Michael Murray would be recommending, rather than taking metformin, for example, for blood sugar or whatever the current blood pressure drug is. There are some natural treatments, right? This is what we're getting at, is that there are alternatives to these drugs. So if you're going to recommend, berberine for blood sugar or for related issues, these kind of things, and I know that it's a sore spot for me and for all of us, because in our industry, because of the for-profit model of our medical system, we are lacking the kind, to some extent, the kind of human clinical trials that we wish we had on every supplement. We wish it was pure science, and just because something naturally occurring could be beneficial, that we would get tons of studies done on it. No, because we're in a for-profit, patent medicine sort of model, and we could talk about all that, but we assume that people sort of know as they're coming to the table why natural medicines, natural supplements are not given the attention and the red carpet that pharmaceutical drugs are. It's not because of any lack of benefit or any danger. Usually it's because of a lack of a profit motive. Nobody has a patent on berberine or L-tyrosine or chromium, except in very limited cases, where they can get some kind of intellectual property on a special formula. But that's sort of beside the point. When there are human clinical trials on supplements for disease and health conditions, we can assume there's also an NNT and an NNH for those kind of substances as well, correct?
It may depend. I don't know that I would say that it exists for supplements, because supplements are examined under somewhat different model than the big pharmaceutical double-blind placebo drug-based trials, because one, they don't want to have a disease endpoint unless they're trying to take that to market as a drug. And so I'm not sure that corollary exists. It may in some of the studies. And I'll just mention one of my best resources for knowing, is there significant studies on something? A lot of people like PubMed. I like Google Scholar. Scholar.google.com, because it'll tell you how many studies there are for all time and for different year segments. And so you can actually go see how many studies they have in their database for an ingredient like berberine. And my assumption is, if there's hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of studies, as there are in many cases, research money doesn't go there if there isn't some potential benefit. So once it starts getting traction in the science marketplace, research money comes along to fund these studies, and these studies reveal, in somewhat of a disease model study in many cases, will this help with blood sugar, for example. But I'd like to just make a little bit of a disclaimer here of my own opinion. I think a lot of my own opinion sometimes, but here it goes. Drugs are not nutrients. Nutrients are not drugs. So let's start with that premise, and let's not confuse the two. Doctors treat disease. Doctors use drugs to treat disease. We use nutrition to nourish the body. That's a very different process. The body is a very efficient animal that has the capability of using nutrients of the earth, different compounds that exist forever on the earth and in our bodies, and we can appropriate those. It's not the magic in the supplement itself. The magic is in the body's ability to recognize, uptake, utilize nutrients, and therefore benefit the biochemical processes of repairing, maintaining, and restoring the body. And even if they are used in a drug model study, that benefit does not, in my mind, some people, the FDA, may want to claim it to be a drug because of that. But my opinion is it reveals the power of nature, the power of the body to exist in harmony, and our body's intelligent desire to repair, given the right set of circumstances, it will. And so the idea that nutrients are not studied, one, that's patently false. There are thousands and hundreds of thousands of studies that people can find. So we know these nutrients provide benefit. I think that what we need to do is stop thinking of nutrients as a way of treating our problems. I want something for my diabetes. I want something for my arthritis. I want something for my blood pressure. And we need to educate ourselves and consumers and even vendors to embrace the idea that we are nourishing the structure function of the body. A joint support is euphemistically a good description of what something's designed for, but it's still, it wouldn't surprise me if the FDA decides, oh, well, that's a claim, joint support. Any support nutrient for anything is drug claim. We're not there yet, but we might not be far from it either. But in either case, if we teach people that glucosamine helps nourish the cartilage, hyaluronic acid supports the synovial fluid, manganese supports the tendons and ligaments of your joints. So these nutrients have very specific benefits that have nothing to do with healing your arthritis. They have everything to do with nurturing the parts of the body that you are targeting to get that result. So that's another one of my passionate topics, and you can tell I get excited about that one too, Rob.
I'm with you on that. And, I share that philosophy that, it's an old saying, but, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And, I think that's what so much of our approach, when you look at getting back to basics, because there are no, magic bullets. Really, I think in pharmaceuticals, as well as natural medicine, there are no magic bullets. It's a fallacy. It's something that doesn't exist.
Yes.
We shouldn't be looking for a one size fits all or a miracle in a bottle. These aren't paradigms that work for anyone except, someone trying to make a fast buck.
Well, how many drugs do you know that actually cure a disease? If you have to be on a drug for a lifetime, that's hardly a cure. It's only a treatment. And so if that treatment isn't effective at moving you forward, maybe you want to rethink what's wrong with this picture. Is there something wrong with the value of this drug? Might be, look into that. But how can you actually affect a positive change in your body? That's something that everybody can do. They can learn how to approach their challenges in a positive, life affirming and life building and life supporting way. And our philosophy is you don't build health by using drugs only. Whether you use drugs and you don't use drugs, you need to be well nourished to be healthy, and you need to live a healthy lifestyle. It doesn't come if you won't do it, but it's there for people who will take those steps to move it forward. And
Yeah,
don't be so
the other
dependent
thing,
on drugs.
I mean, the term that I became familiar with when I kind of, another Michael that was a great influence for me. Michael Murray is fantastic, but Michael Moore on the subject of herbs. I don't think anybody did more for Western medical herbalism, in my opinion, except maybe Dr. John Scudder back in the day or something, or John Uri Lloyd, some of these pioneering guys. But Michael Moore, at the Southwest School of Botanical Medicine, I used to learn quite a bit from him, some of his lectures and writings over the years. And he, introduced me to a term which is quite common in the medical literature, but iatrogenic symptoms, right, or iatrogenic problems. Well, what are these? Well, by definitions, these are problems caused by your drug, your prescribed medicine, that the common practice is for then to prescribe a drug to treat those iatrogenic symptoms, which we would call, in layman's terms, side effects. So if a drug has side effects, then the solution is not to take you off of the drug, it's to prescribe another drug, which, based on the nature of pharmaceuticals, we might assume would also have potential iatrogenic symptoms. So now you have this long list of prescribed medications, and it's sort of like, where does the line begin and end? Is one treating a symptom that you had independent of any medication, or is it treating iatrogenic symptoms?
Well, it takes a reframing of one's philosophy, one's confidence, and those of us that have embraced, a natural lifestyle in the hopes of staying healthier longer, avoiding the need for prescription drugs, doing good things for our health and our families and our communities, all of these things that we embrace as individuals and families and communities who embrace that the idea that nature holds the key to health that pharmaceutical drugs will never offer. If you ask yourself, well, what does this drug actually do? How does it make me better? If you have arthritis and you can't garden and you can't dance and you take a pain medication and now you can garden and dance, has that drug made you any better? No. The damage is still going on. It still exists. You just can't feel it. So it's hidden the actual effects of your condition from you. And as if, though, now you're better. Just take this pain medication and now you're better. Take this cholesterol medication. Now you're better because your numbers are good. All of them, these ideas that these numbers are, these arbitrary numbers are actually the right measurements. I did a brilliant set of interviews with Dr. Russell Jaffe about 8 different biomarkers. And each one of them, the idea is that there's a continuum of the out of norm numbers. If you're slightly out of norm, that's not nearly as serious as it goes up the continuum a long way till then maybe when you're at your worst, you might be a candidate for drug and medical interventions, but all along the way, those higher levels, you're not gaining the benefit from medical interventions, and you will benefit from lifestyle interventions. And so we're too quick to get on medications because we're afraid not to, I think, is kind of the simple answer.
Yeah, no, I think there's so much we could, look at the lifestyle. And that's kind of the things that you and I deal with on a regular basis. These are the kind of things that you go into depth on these specific natural approaches on Health Quest. If people go to Health Quest podcast, you're not selling anything. You've just for years and years been providing content going into depth on natural treatments or we should say natural support for the body, and a lot of different lifestyle medicine sort of things. So some great interviews I want to go and find that I have not heard yet, like that one with Dr. Russell Jaffe. But I did want to circle back because I kind of led you in a different direction as you were going into the COVID-19 vaccine. So I know a lot of folks are interested in hearing about the Pfizer vaccine and other COVID-19 vaccines. What should we know about the NNTs and possible NNHs of the COVID vaccines?
Well, the NNT.com has done a wonderful job. They put out a long, extensive article where they examine the NNT of the Pfizer vaccine. And they said the other Moderna, Johnson & Johnson vaccines have similar numbers. And so this one example can serve as a good example for the category of drugs. They also, as part of this same article, they examine a lot of the popular treatments, and they rate them based on their opinion of, the evidence of effectiveness. And so it's a really good article for people who want to delve into it more deeply. But here's what I found that really spoke to me, because when this vaccine came out, and they're talking about these vaccines being 90% effective at keeping you out of the hospital or dying, that's a pretty dramatic statistic, because of course we're seeing on the news every day how many people did suffer and went into the hospital and died, and who wants that? And so with my wife having an autoimmune disease, it's a question of, well, are we going to be better if we're vaccinated because it might bolster your immune function? And, that's eventually the route that we took, was getting, the one-shot Johnson & Johnson vaccine because of her risk of what we thought was this COVID risk. So here's what they revealed in the studies about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. How did we get to 90% effective? If you take that same 100 people and you don't treat them, no vaccine, there will be 0.4% cases of serious COVID hospitalization or death, less than 1%. Out of 100 people who are not treated. If you take 100 people and you give them the vaccine, that number drops to something like 0.004%, a 90% reduction, but only compared to the 0.4% that got it without the vaccine. So the difference between the 0.4 and the 0.044, whatever those numbers are, is a 90% reduction.
Okay.
If compared the relative risk reduction, just comparing it to those who got it without the vaccine. But the actual number of people who got COVID who didn't get vaccines is less than 0.5%. And those who were vaccinated, it was less than, like 0.1%. So yes, there was a reduction, but if they're only telling you out of 100 people that this less than 0.5%, and the corollary to that is a 90% reduction, everybody hears, it's reducing my risk by 90%. It's not. It's only reducing it for actually 1/200th of the population of that study. And so they knew that at the very beginning. The whole model was you have to treat a ton of people to get a statistical benefit. And so the only way they're going to get a ton of people to take that drug is if they tell them the relative risk reduction and not the absolute risk reduction, or the real NNT. If you have a 1 in 200 chance of avoiding COVID by taking our vaccine, that's a lot different than saying you have, a 90% chance of avoiding it. And they're the same studies, but it's the numbers that they're actually reporting on that are the dirty little secret. So it's not like one number's good and one number's bad. It's they're representing this one number to be the most important number, when it's actually, much less important than the absolute risk reduction. So consumers might have made different decisions if we actually knew that. It might be why we didn't see some of these super spreader events that were supposed to occur actually occur. All the people on spring break, well, it's going to really be a mess. And those didn't occur. Now, I don't want to, downplay any of the seriousness of COVID and those people who got it and those people who died and their families. It's a terrible disease. And so there's no fault or blame for consumers doing what they seem is in their best interest. Was it in our best interest? I didn't stop to look at it from the NNT. I don't know if I'd have had access to that number. The study that I'm talking about with the NNT.com came out in May of this year. We have time to now look back, and see things perhaps a little more clearly. But in my mind, man, it's just more evidence of the pharmaceutical industry misrepresenting what they're doing and not being transparent and teaching us true and well. So, what do you think about it now? I don't know, but I'm not looking to take that vaccine anymore. I bit the bullet one time, and I don't usually take vaccines, and I understand why. This was one where we bought into the storyline because of our own fear, and we had no way of knowing otherwise. So, to each their own. All the people who avoided it because they didn't believe what they were hearing, well, kudos to them. They probably made a good choice as long as they didn't get sick. And chances are the vaccine wouldn't have helped much anyway, apparently.
So your personal feeling at this, you're basically saying that if you do regret taking the COVID vaccine.
Well, I don't like to think of it as I live in regret. I bought into it. I did it. It's not the first time I bought into something and made a mistake. But because I feel that we had a rationale. You talked about risk benefit, so I know that with my wife and her autoimmune condition, if she gets sick, it could be much more serious for her. And so, she did it thinking, she was going to get this great protection from it. And I did it because I wanted to support her. And, my best friend, they didn't, they talk about us drinking the Kool-Aid. And so, but it was, I do believe that sometimes medical gets it right. They're not always wrong and not everything is bad. And this was a time of, the kind of emotional upheaval. And I just credit everybody for doing the best they can, whatever it is. Would I be different about it had I known what I know now? Sure, I would have thought quite a bit differently. Fortunately, we have had no episodes of COVID in my house. And I know people who have been vaccinated and who haven't been vaccinated who have also dealt with it. There are people dealing with long-term effects of the vaccines. So the side effects are very real for those people who have experienced it. Fortunately, we seem to have avoided those. So the side effects of both the COVID, the long COVID, the vaccine, the side effects of all that, it's a very unfortunate set of circumstances that we find ourselves in trying to evaluate it. However, I think that at least now going forward, we can say, look to the flu vaccines, the shingles vaccine, the pneumonia vaccine, all the vaccines that they want to push on us. We can take a second look and see, well, what's the NNT for this? What's the numbers needed to harm for this? What's it actually doing to me? And does that make good sense to me? If we at least have the option to examine more fully the evidence, we can make better decisions. And the pharmaceutical industry isn't about to give us that information. We have to dig for it and understand the implications. And I really appreciate you giving me an opportunity. I would recommend that it's a series of 8 interviews with Dr. Jaffe, and he talks about the 8 biochemical markers of health. And so he talks about blood pressure, blood sugar, diabetes, A1C, C-reactive protein, and how to evaluate these as markers of health and as on a continuum, not like, oh, today you're healthy, you're up 2 points, now you're not. No, it's a long continuum of opportunity that you have to improve your health before you ever get to the point where prescription medication intervention is going to give you any benefit at all. And so I recommend them as a series for people who want to understand their blood tests and what's the significance of these different biochemical markers. So there's over 400 really good interviews on there. We go in depth with these different experts, and it won't be but a few days people are going to be able to listen to you too, as well as one of our expert guests. So.
Oh, thanks for doing. Yeah, thanks, Steve. I really appreciated your having myself on. I appreciated when you had Dr. Decker Weiss on for his charity work and for the food movement in the past. Some of the folks that you've had on, like Stuart Tomk, I mean, going way back to more than one company represented some interviews with Stuart, but Stuart, a good friend, but also just always an exciting guest on radio and podcast, wherever you hear him. Every time I hear Stuart speak, I think, man, he's really getting this dialed in on his, but he's been great for a long time. It's about getting the message out there. It's about inspiring people to think about their health in different ways, giving them new and challenging information, and folks like yourself, and also people like Stuart and some of the great guests you've had on. I really look forward to checking out Dr. Jaffe. It's all about going a little deeper. And I feel like listening to experts talk on these subjects from different angles, I'm always learning more, and it inspires me to think about my health in different ways. And I got to figure it's likely to do the same for others.
Well, that's one of the skills that I have learned that I have, because I did radio for 20 years, and I've been actually streaming on the internet since 1999 before I adopted podcasting in 2011. So I've interviewed thousands of people because this is how I learn. So I've had the fortunate pleasure of interviewing icons of the natural products industry, with also knowing consumers and customers being behind the counter. I know what they need to know. So my interview style, I believe, facilitates educating a consumer, giving them enough knowledge to understand and take out some of the confusion that they might have as to what this is, what it does, what can I think about it. And interviewing some of these wonderful, brilliant people that have been part of this industry. Part of my pleasure now, in a sad kind of way, is I have these interviews in our library of experts, revered scientists that have passed away. Dr. Steven Sinatra, Dr. Hector Lopez, Cass Ingram. I have multiple interviews that exist today in the same form that can educate going forward. Even though we've lost them, we haven't lost access to their message. And that's part of what I have attempted to do, is make it easy to find the best content, the best experts, the topic that you're interested in, and explore it in a way that you feel like you've learned something. And you understand it better by the time the interview is done. So I think I've learned that that's one of the skills I have, and it seems to be resonating with people. And, when shows like yours give me an opportunity to talk, it helps us all grow, hopefully. And,
yeah, absolutely.
And it's so important that we facilitate this education stream.
I fully agree. I thank you so much for being such a big part of it, and I'd like to have you back on. In the future, we we could talk about so much more, but I just want to thank you for taking the time today and really sharing a different perspective. I feel like we covered so much here. There'll be links to the things that you talked about in the show notes. And, if folks want to go to the description of the show, they can find links to your podcast, Health Quest, and also to the nnt.com. And I think this is hopefully where it goes to the next level, where folks take what you're saying, what you're talking about, and they start to, as the phrase is so popular these days, do their own research, and they start expanding the way they're doing their own research, because I feel like, I don't know, forewarned is forearmed or something, if people can get this information before they make decisions about what to put in their body, that would be, sort of the ideal scenario, right? If we had a level playing field where somebody can say, yes, this may reduce your risk by this percentage, but here's what that really means. And
Right.
I feel like you're bringing up the relative risk reduction, the actual risk reduction. That is so interesting. It reminds me, just one thing I wanted to just throw in there, just as a thought, as a little health food note. It reminds me of the way that they treated the data between ubiquinol versus ubiquinone, and
Yes.
talking about the bioactive CoQ10 versus regular plain old CoQ10, which is much more affordable, right? And we'd be able to get many more Americans and heart disease sufferers and whatnot on CoQ10 if we and the information I got and got from different people was if they took ubiquinone and they took it with a little bit of fat. In other words, somebody said if you were to take ubiquinone, the less active form of CoQ10, with some nut butter, just at a meal, that they would get basically equal absorption to the much more expensive form, the ubiquinol, the bioactive form. And of course, our industry being, the natural industry being susceptible to marketing as much as anyone, they had these graphs. Here's the absorption of ubiquinone. Here's the absorption of ubiquinol. Well, clearly this represents a huge, increase in absorbability. And then I think it comes back to sort of the relative data versus something that would be reflective of what is your actual increase in bioavailability. That might be on the order of like 3 or 4%, but if you put 1% here and 4% here, it looks like a mountain of increased benefit.
Right. That's a really good point. One of my favorite sayings, Rob, is it's not what we don't know that bothers me. It's what we think we know that ain't so. And so we need to figure out that there's a lot that we don't know and that we also I'm sorry. And we also have to be willing to learn, so what we thought we knew, we need to be willing to rethink, well, is this really true as well in the light of new evidence? There was a time that I promoted coconut oil and then coconut oil was bad. So I was promoting vegetable oils because saturated fats were bad because that was the conventional wisdom and it was preached with really much certainty that it's this way. And now coconut oil's good again, and all those vegetable oils are bad. So, we need to be willing to be fluid, even in our industry, in order to move with what the science is actually revealing and let go of what may have been anecdotal, but not as good as we thought, and embrace that which is new. Many examples of that. But what I do feel is the responsible part of the nutritional products industry, the raw material manufacturers, the supplement makers, the independent retailers, and the staff that work in those little stores relatively little stores. And the consumers that go in there for the kind of information and confidence that they have in the marketplace, that still exists today, but it doesn't exist in the pharmacies, and it doesn't exist on Amazon, and it doesn't exist at the gas station where people can buy their stuff. It's really the independent retailer and the naturopathic doctors that are actually preaching this message in a way that people can appropriate and act as the gatekeepers, point people in the right direction with good, honest information. And that's why you and I both support the independent retailer. We both have been one, and so we know how important it is for the consumer, and we know they're not getting it out there in the marketplace, not even finding quality products necessarily. So there are many things we can talk about over the future, Rob, and I would be happy to be your guest anytime. You can tell I love to tell my side of the story, which I don't always get to do when I'm doing the interview. So thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much, Steve. This has been great. Like I say, we will have to do it again, and there'll be links and information to specifics. But the general takeaway here is you got to check out Health Quest podcasts, because there are over 400 interviews with Steve Lankford here, talking to some really important health experts on some really important topics and thinking, to use a phrase, outside of the box.
Thank you, Rob.
Thanks again, Steve, and have a great one.
You too. Best wishes.